All right, here we go. Welcome back to Hawaii Real, everybody. I'm your host, Ioke Ehu, and this episode is sponsored by Hawaiian Springs Water, our beverage host for this episode. And you can find Hawaiian Springs Water. I'll put the link in the description below. You can buy it directly on Amazon or 7-Eleven, Safeway, all the grocery stores. The thing I like about this water is it's bottled straight from the Big Island, right from the aquifer. They put it right into the bottle. They don't do anything to it. And yeah, it's alkaline water.
I like it.
I like alkaline water because you need a lot of French fries and gravy. Kind of tapers it all down. You know?
Well, you don't look it. You look good, man.
Thanks so much. All right, and today I have the utmost honor of having on Mayor Rick Blangiardi. Thank you so much for coming on this show.
Oh, thank you. I've been looking forward to doing this with you. So I consider it an honor to be here and be on your podcast.
That's so awesome. And because we have a mutual friend, Scott Humber.
Yes.
Oh, unfortunately, couldn't be here today. He's got family issues he's got to take care of. Me and Scott go kind of way back. So do you and Scott too, right?
Yeah. From pretty much the time you arrived in Hawaii. And
yeah.
I was so taken with Scott in my initial interview. I was back in 2002. I had just returned home. I actually came back in July of 2002. And so it was about a month or two later, and I'd taken over. I had the responsibility for two television stations, KGMB and KHON, and I was splitting my time in both. And that in and of itself was unprecedented, and things were challenging enough and pretty free form at trying to figure out exactly the dysfunction of these stations and why. And into my life comes Scott. He's just in town, came back because of his wife being from here. He's fortunate enough to marry an incredible woman. And he's looking for work. And, doesn't have much of a resume because he's like in his early 30s. But I did like the fact that he had been back in Boston and, as he said at the time, doing the Bill Parcells show. So that got my attention. But at the end of the day, I didn't have a sports producer. I didn't even have a job for sports producer, but that seemed to be his strong point. And I liked him so much and what he'd been doing. And I just said, what the heck? I didn't have it figured out on what I was doing at the stations anyway. I said, you're hired, but only if you say yes, because if I offer you a job and you go out and shop, you're going to take somebody else, forget I even talked to you, that kind of thing. So let me know right now. And he agreed to that. and anyway, and I just watched Scott evolve over the years, and he did so beautifully. And to the point where, as I'm leaving Hawaii News Now, when I decided to run for mayor, Scott not only had been the news director, but he'd been really well ensconced in there as the news director and really brought us to a different level. I was very proud of him, and it was a great joy to work with him all those years. But I actually thought when I left, I was saying goodbye in that context as far as working together. But as it's turned out now, despite the fact we've only been in office for 16 months, through a whole lot of different things, if you will, here we are, and we're working together again. He agreed to come on and just started, I think, less than 2 months ago as our director of communications, and I'm really excited about that. And
yeah, it's super awesome that you guys got the team back up together.
Yeah. He brought over Ian Shoring, who, again, not unlike Scott, I watched Ian evolve from his early stages of working with us and just Mustang his way through our organization. And no matter what we threw at him, he managed to not only do it, but did it extremely well. And, those kind of people are hard to come by, and especially somebody who understood what it was we were trying to do, because for any better way to say it, we were trying to really push the envelope on what it meant to be a 21st century multimedia company. And in that context, not just understanding mobile technology, but how people were consuming information through multiple platforms across all demographics, really out of the mold from having grown up in the TV business for 43 years. How we used to do business back in the old analog world days, and the world was very different. But even including podcasts, if you will. I mean, I think Ian understood it from A to Z, and just gave us a great dimension. So to have both of those guys, and I credit Scott for kind of convincing Ian that he should take this leap of faith and come join us. But really, on behalf of my entire team and the other two women that we have with us, Molly Pierce and Brandy Higa, the four of them, I think now as we turn the corner in this second year, that they represent a combined talent basis, the kind of communications team that we really want to have in place to really, quite honestly, do a couple of things. One, celebrate the work of our administration because we've brought in a great team. But I think even more so in our efforts right now in this community, given the impact of COVID on our economic environment, that we need to restore hope in people. We've got to build back hope because we know the trust has eroded. We knew the trust in city government was really at an all-time low when we walked into office. I'm not saying that to disparage anybody. That's the result of the surveys that were being done. I don't have anything to speak ill of anybody, but that's what we inherited. And, in stepping in, if you think about it, when we were hiring people in November, December of 2020, nobody was even talking about, the imminence, if you will, of vaccines. So that was uncertain. There was a lot of fear and uncertainty because we'd gone through an extended lockdown that had become so surreal that it was hard to believe. And even in retrospect, hard to believe that we went through that. So make a long story short, we're in the spirit of making things happen, but we know first and foremost, if done correctly, we need to also educate people because I think it's really important for them to feel good about the leadership that's in city government right now, especially where people don't trust politicians anyway. So we've got all of that to overcome, and it starts with good communication. And I feel so positive about the potential of this communications team and the contribution they're going to make, not just for our team, but for the community at large.
Well, I'm going to turn this back to you. I know you like to talk about your team. You like to talk about others and praise them and talk about all the things that they've done to help you. But I do kind of want to dive back into who you are.
Why?
Because, well, it's going to transition throughout the course of this episode.
No, that's good.
To leadership.
Yeah.
We talked about leadership before we even started rolling here. And I think that comes to play where, the people of this city and county, who's the real Rick Blangiardi? So I kind of I threw out some questions here.
Okay.
So let's talk about where you're from.
Sure. Well, I know I sound like I fell off a fruit truck in the Bronx, but I actually grew up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and till the age of 17, and then I went away. We could talk about that, but I've lived in Hawaii since 1965.
Wow.
And I came here to go to the University of Hawaii and I was there for my first 2 years, freshman and sophomore. I played football here and was doing pretty well with that, but due to a family emergency, left. I actually moved out here because my father got transferred out here as a machinist to work at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. I grew up in a bilingual household. Both parents are Italian. And my mother was the youngest of 9. My father was the oldest of 7. My mother had an 8th grade education and my father had a high school degree, but they're both of that vintage. My father was born in 1923. At the age of 7, he was shining shoes in the streets during the Depression. And at the age of 18, he joined the Navy after Pearl Harbor in 1941. And then comes home and marries my mother in October of 45 from the war. Marries her in November, comes home in October, marries her in November. I'm born 10 months later, like that, right? So I grew up like that with hardworking people. And in that Boston area, I was the first in my family to go to college, or had the potential to go to college. And actually was in a prep school for the Naval Academy at the time when that happened. I graduated high school in 1964. And I was all set to go to Boston College. I was academically flawed, which is why I was in prep school. But I went down there to make my father proud because World War II for my father in the Navy, he was of that vintage. Mm-hmm. My father was also in the reserves at the time, was a big deal. To be recruited by a service academy meant a whole lot. And not only that, I gotta be careful how I say this because I don't want to misstate my abilities as an athlete, but Navy between 1960 and 64 in that post-World War II environment also produced 2 Heisman Trophy winners, one in a guy named Roger Staubach and the other in a guy named Joe Bellino, who happened to be from Winchester, Massachusetts. So the prominence of not only the military academy football, but Navy and the recognition it was receiving, so to be recruited by them was a big deal. But let me best sum up my whole career there. So I had pretty good grades, but I needed to get my math SAT score up by about 100 points, okay? I had over 500, but you needed like a 6 something or whatever at the time. So I get down there and we took the same classes as the plebes. And I still remember, because it's chilling, I'd always been a fairly good student. I still remember opening up the pre-calculus book, pre-calculus. And the only thing I recognized on the page number was the page number on the page. I knew I was in trouble, you know? And I was in this prep school, seriously, with 175 guys. And that's actually Bellino and Staubach both went to similar prep schools. Navy had 3 of them. One was Columbian in Washington, D.C., which is where Joe Bellino went, and Roger Staubach went to New Mexico military. And I went to Bullis Prep in Silver Spring, Maryland. So, you know, out of everybody there was all state, all everything. And I had some pretty good credentials as well. But I'm being facetious, but like 172 of these guys had like 700 or better in their math SAT scores, but they couldn't write their name with a crayon. Okay. I mean, I was on the kind of the complete opposite. I had pretty good verbal SAT scores, but that's not the curriculum. In those days, it was only naval engineering. Right. And so for them, they were all whizzes with slide rules and math and everything else. And they were just trying to learn vocabulary to get their SAT scores up. I was in there. So it was very sobering. And so anyway, make a long story short, we had a good football team. We did really well. We beat the plebes that year. I had a full ride to BC. I was all set to go there. My mother called up and said that Robert McNamara at the time was Secretary of Defense under Lyndon Johnson. This is the post-Kennedy era from Boston. So President Kennedy was, for New England, Massachusetts especially, not unlike Senator Inouye was for Hawaii, right? So they were closing down some of the places that the president had funded, and one of them was this place called the Watertown Arsenal, which is where my father was working, but they offered him a transfer to one of 2 Navy yards, Newport News, Virginia, or Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. And suddenly my little Italian mother, who was 5'1", 104 pounds, you know, the youngest of 9, wanted to go to Hawaii, but not without me, the oldest son. And I just, to make my father proud, agreed to go to this prep school and just got humiliated all year. But I was staying there. I wouldn't quit. But it was brain damaging for me because I don't think I've ever felt that dumb in my life as we plowed our way through these courses. But I wasn't about to deny my mother. So I made a decision. And so, you know, those days we didn't have Google or anything. So my condition was I will write to the University of Hawaii, assuming there was one, find their address, which I don't even remember how I did that. And if they play football, I told my mother, I'll go. I didn't know because honestly, in the Northeast and the way I'd grown up and things being what they were, this is even before ESPN was even around. I mean, if you go back in that point in time. But sure enough, I got back a letter from the athletic department, from young Suck Coe at the time, as athletic director, who told me about this young coach. They didn't have a head coach. They were looking for one, but they just had this former player who just was about to go into coaching that I would hear from, and his name was Larry Price. And so sure enough, I got a letter from Larry Price, which basically said, "Dear Howley, how dare you even ask if we play football? Of course we play football here, but we don't give out scholarships to guys from the East Coast. If you want one, you got to come here and earn it." It was like that.
Yeah.
You know, I had a full ride to BC and a few other places, but I took that. And that was the beginning. And so did well, played for a couple of years and did really pretty good for coach, but my mother got very sick and had to go back east, and we thought she was going to die. She ended up having a number of multiple major surgeries, but she lived. But my parents' marriage broke up. I went back as the oldest son to take care of my mother, and Larry knew those circumstances. So unlike some kid that came in here for a couple of years and then just quit, he stayed in touch with me because it was very real. It was pretty traumatic and wasn't anything I was planning on doing.
How old were you when you had to go back?
I came here, I was 18 years old. Because I went to prep school for a year. I got out of high school at 17. So I turned 19. I still remember when I turned 19, we were playing Colorado State. I was 19, and then I was 20 years old when I went back, in retrospect. Because I had the year of prep school, which helped me mature a little bit in years. But anyway, so I went back and I'd given up playing major college. I went to Springfield College grade school because I knew I wanted to coach. And so I did, and we had great teams. I played there. I had a red shirt for a year, but we had played a couple of years, played on a New England championship team, and I went into coaching right after at the University of Connecticut and was coaching there. It was in my second year. And I used to hear periodically from Coach Price, and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm going to go to, I've been coaching at the University of Connecticut. It was really only a part-time job. But it was full-time during the season. And I'm teaching school and driving a cab, and I'm working construction on weekends and unloading down at the docks when a friend of mine would call me and anything I could do to get by.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, but I'm going to go to graduate school, get my master's degree. That much I know if I want to be a college coach. And he said, well, why don't you come back to Hawaii? I just finished my program in educational administration. It's a really good program. And then I think the real hook was he said, and I need a linebacker coach. And changed my life.
So you came back as a student and a coach?
Came back student and coach, 1971. And I coached 3 years with Coach Price under Dave Holmes. And Larry became the head coach, and he made me who he was as the associate. Well, I was defensive coordinator, and then I became the associate coach. So when I left coaching in 1977, I was a defensive coordinator, associate head coach at UH. I had a master's degree, but in those years, we were really, truly coaching for the love of the game. So Larry was head coach. He was making $25,000 a year. I was making $15,300. But the catalyst to that was I had a baby coming, and so I had a choice. I was either going to go back east and coach, and I had a job back east and live at my mother's house, or stay here in Hawaii and reinvent myself. And so I talked to a guy named Frank Valeni from the old Melissa Valeni, who used to do sports, and suggested I talk to Cease Heftel. And basically, what I knew the general sales manager as well because he used to follow us on the road. Pretty much said to me, look, Rick, if you're willing to work hard in this business, I knew nothing about selling television, nothing. He said, if you're willing to work hard in this business in 3 years, you can make $50,000 a year.
And this was back at what year?
This was 1977.
Wow, so that's a lot of money for that time.
$50,000 a year sounded like a lot of money. I think, coincidental, if you will, it was more than 3 times what I was making. I wasn't worried about working hard. I mean, it was double what Coach Price was making. But quite honestly, it struck a chord in me because, as I said earlier, I was the first in my family to go to college, and I grew up in a really large family. And part of that whole odyssey, if you will, was to get educated and get a good job that paid well. And I was doing well in my job, but I wasn't making very much money. And with a baby coming, I mean, in retrospect, I wouldn't have said it then, but I was sort of self-indulgent, if you will. I loved coaching football. I was pretty good at it. I loved all that, but I at that time, under those circumstances, it was sort of all about me, and I was not that guy with a baby coming. So rather than take the coaching job back east, I decided to stay in a place that I love with people that I'd grown to love in this community and take a shot at reinventing myself and try this sales thing. And thinking, if I flunk at that, I think I can go back and coach because I really felt I could do that. So I left, and then a couple of months later, Larry resigned, and then that brought in Dick Tomey. And by the way, when they brought Dick Tomey in, when Ray Nagel, then the athletic director, hired Dick Tomey from UCLA, they only paid Dick $35,000 a year at that point. So that was a different era. And, I have no regrets. I ended up going on and having a pretty solid 43-year career in media. Never really looked back. I was fortunate at in the first year that at that time, K59 Radio, Earl McDaniel, who was the general manager, had known me and heard me speak at quarterback clubs and whatever, asked me if I had any interest in doing Rainbow football on the radio with Jim Leahy. And I said, I never did that before, and so I was actually fortunate enough from 78 football season through 89 before I left to go to Seattle. I did football with Jim on radio and then radio and TV for all those years, with the exception of 1 year and 1 year only. I did it with Joe Moore and Les Kiter because of some transition in radio. But that kept me in touch with the game, and I really loved that.
So can I ask, you said 43 years in TV, and before that you did a lot of coaching and football, you played football. Which do you like more? Working, like if money was not an issue, which would you prefer to work in, TV or football? Yeah,
I always liked coaching. And I think my management style, for those people who work with me, so that I had the coaching overtones. It just, I mean, I never look back. I will tell you, in my first 6 months of the job at KGMB, yes, I was trying to work hard. I was a little disillusioned because I'd been doing it all during my 20s, had some success, and I went into something I knew nothing about, right? So admittedly, in retrospect, I say this today, I felt sorry for myself, and that was before we even started announcing on anything, because I left in March, right? But it just so happened in September was when my oldest son, who's now 44 years old, was born. So I always missed the game and missed coaching. And, I would have liked to have stayed and be a football coach, but I try not to make those comparisons. You asked me the question. If I could have rewritten, I would like to have been a head coach at a major college team today, and maybe I had done it a couple of times. And that's not just about the kind of money they make today, but I would like to have done that. Yeah, I had some pretty big positions in broadcast. I was president of national companies a couple of times, in addition to some major market television stations. But none of those felt like being the head coach at, I don't know, name a Division I school that's really. If you want me to be really truthful in this moment, I would have liked to have done that. I'm not saying I would have been, Saban or anybody like that, but I think I was on a way to. I could have become a head coach at a pretty good school. I think that was in me to do. I would have loved that opportunity, but that never happened.
What do you love most about football?
It's the intensity of it. It's what it takes from you and what it gives you all at the same time. And what it asks from you. We used to say in that game, what you give is what you keep, and what you save is what you lose. You better put it all out there. So that game taught me a lot about myself and my own potential. I was fortunate in high school that we ended up as I was captain of an undefeated state championship team. And those kind of things are really life-changing. And so it's so profound. It goes so deep. I just learned things about myself and my own potential that I don't know. It was such a catalyst to my personal growth, and so you have a reverence for that, where you realize this game and everything it's asking from me is taking all of this out of me. And not only that, it's challenging me to go somewhere where I've never been before. I loved that. And I saw it do it for a lot of other guys too. Yeah. And, you play it at that level. It's very real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you suffer a lot going through football training, practice, calisthenics.
It's everything you want to learn about pain, and
Yeah.
everything you want to talk about overcoming adversity,
Yeah.
and everything else you can possibly imagine as far as pushing yourself to the limits. But you also, at the same time, you pick up on the teamwork part of it, what it's like to really sweat and bleed with a bunch of guys like that, and what that represents, especially when you start generating some success together and overcoming adversity and pulling off wins when you weren't supposed to win and things like that. It's transformative. It really is. So that's what I like about it. It's a very powerful activity.
So you mentioned in that whole answer a little bit about personal growth. Has personal growth been a big issue for you throughout these years
Sure.
as you've gone?
Yeah, personal growth. I just talked about it today in my cabinet meeting. I'm still trying to grow and learn at the age of 75. I think that, there's a lot I could say about that, but I was just recently talking about an old professor of physiology that I had back in the days when we used to sign up to get on these treadmills and do obscene things to ourselves for $15 so these guys could test us to exhaustion and fatigue. It was, and Dr. Brainerd used to say, man is a rugged animal. We ask too little of ourselves. You can push yourself a lot harder. That's true also in growth and learning, right? In life and being curious and challenging yourself. I've always tried to buy into that. And I think that, honestly, from the time, even when I started coaching in my professional life, but even from the time I walked into KGB not knowing anything, it was like, okay, can I learn this? How fast can I learn? What do I have to do? How do I develop? How do I get good at this? And that led to one promotion after another. And then the jobs got bigger and they got more complex. And so I will tell you this I'm saying this with humility. I hope it's going to come across. But I left the business at 43 after 43 years on January 15th when I retired from KGMB 2020 to run for mayor. That I knew pretty well. I mean, life was on the edge in broadcast. No 2 days were ever the same. You never know what to expect because we were not only in the news business, but just the overall dynamics of what happens in media companies. But I left all of that to go do something that I didn't, had never done before. And so that in and of itself became its own challenge because, we announced on January 15th. I announced on February 12th. I left on January 15th. And March 7th, we closed down for COVID, right? And that became its own, to campaign for the very first time against those circumstances where we were locked down and everything else was its own, like learning on the run, and we weren't having fundraisers or doing anything like that. We're trying to figure it all out. And it was hard to even put together anybody to help us, quite honestly, because we weren't even allowed to get together. If you remember, this is pretty tough. Yeah. So, endless Zoom calls, whatever, but then you get elected. And I walk into a business now where the stakes are really high. And it started out first and foremost with having to put together a great team. We could talk about that because I love talking about that and how we did that and what it represented and how I feel about the fact that I didn't walk into the job alone. I walked in with 40 plus people, very talented, very committed, most of whom signed up for this during the same set of conditions. Although I'd made the decision to go pre-COVID, when we were hiring them in that fall after we won in November, December, like I said, it was a love project for all of us. It was people who left private sector jobs, took pay cuts, did whatever, who understood we were at stake. And nobody was really certain what was going to happen. But for me, the reality was I got in touch with the job, not just being mayor, but the complex nature of city operations. Yeah. So all of a sudden now, I want to be effective as mayor. I want to be able to lead effectively because that's my responsibility. But I'm now leading men and women who have a knowledge base very different than what I know, given their expertise. So now I'm trying to lead, govern over a complex operation of things that I don't know. And that's been true to this day. There's not enough time to learn all the complexity of the cities, and so leading in an environment where if you're honest, what you don't know. I think that's one of the things you have to get in touch with and don't pretend otherwise. And dealing with really talented people who are very committed, passionate, driven to succeed, and how to drive execution and trying to make all of that happen is put me very much in touch with learning and being intellectually honest about what I don't know, what do I know, how do we drive execution, how do we create success when I'm dealing with stuff that I'll never really fully understand. There's not enough time to do that. I just can't. I don't even have the aptitude. Our guys who work in wastewater, I could break it down. Even something familiar like Parks and Recreation, the complexity of that, it might sound on the surface, oh yeah, but no, that's a lot going on there. So in all of those departments, or for that matter, our business office, budget of fiscal services, a $4 billion budget. I'm taking nothing away from budgets that I used to deal with or what it takes to operationalize and run an enterprise. But we start talking about $4 billion and all the other elements that go with that and how the city operates financially. And these are very complex. So this has been, for me, since we're talking about sports, every day is kind of game day. I have a really talented team around me, and my role is to be a facilitator for them, to be the guy they need me to be in the context when I can be that as mayor, but also what can I do to facilitate their growth and their learning, because we're all learning on the job, to hopefully make a really positive difference. So this is a very exciting, very energizing job and time of my life. People ask me, what's the biggest surprise? And I think they expect me to say, oh yeah, well, it's so tough from the private sector to the city. I tell them all the time, whenever I am asked that, so I don't know if you were going to ask me that, but I just volunteer it. The biggest surprise for me is I've encountered a sense of responsibility unlike anything I've ever known before. I raised 3 kids and kind of raised myself in a way, so to speak. It's my own growth. But I've been responsible for organizations and people's livelihoods. And I've worked for privately held companies and publicly traded companies and competitive environments and driving earnings and analyst reports and news ratings and so on and so forth. Broadcast was a very competitive business. I think that's why it was compatible to my coaching background, but I still would have liked the coaching part of it. But this is given exacerbated by the time, because leadership is situational, that we stepped into office and where Hawaii was, where Oahu was just 16 months ago in January 2nd, 2021. The decisions you get to make, the things that you look at doing, even as we engineered our way through COVID, the tier system initially, and then when we hit the Delta variant and what that required from us, and then the decision we made even with Omicron, all the way through, which has permeated almost every single month of being in office. There's a lot at stake on that and the kinds of decisions we were making. And so that sense of responsibility is scary good in a lot of ways, because you don't want to disappoint and you realize you can make a difference and you want to make a difference.
Yeah, I guess from my point of view, from what you've all just said right here, it's realizing that the responsibility that you have directly affects so many people's lives, whereas running a private corporation, you may affect stakeholders or income, profits, stuff like that, or maybe some people's jobs here and there. But, as the mayor and, running a city, you're in charge and directly responsible for the decisions that cover the entire island here.
Let me give you a really specific example, because I'm extremely proud of this and it's really about our team.
Yeah.
But they had a hard time initially with the CARES Act money in the prior administration. And again, I'm not casting aspersions, but that was unprecedented. Suddenly getting federal monies for distribution, but with it came some tricky rules from the U.S. Treasury, so on and so forth. And quite honestly, it took them nearly 6 months to give out $1 million. We come in and people had been, really challenged, if you will, for quite a long time. And there was a lot of discrepancies. If you remember, people weren't getting unemployment checks. There was a lot of concern. The government implemented, an eviction moratorium. So if you couldn't pay your rent, you get evicted. But, a lot of people don't like living like that either, but we're in that sort of. And then along comes the rent and utility relief. And Honolulu was awarded $126 million. And we know that there was a need out there to get this money distributed. And it wasn't going to be easy to do. And anyway, we figured it out. We brought in some strategic partners, Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement, Catholic Charities, enlisted First Hawaiian Bank and Bob Harrison, and our team figured out how to do that. And so the other counties had a difficult time, and they forfeited their money over to us, and so did the state. We actually ended up with $200 million. Wow. And we were doing it here in Honolulu, and I was still giving out that money. And we looked at the map. We looked at where they distributed the CARES money prior, and it was sort of weighted on the east side because they didn't have the technology or communication barriers that we ran into in our mapping strategy, which was the entire side to the most needy, especially in the west side, where you have language issues, technology issues, you have all kinds of things in trying to disseminate this money. And at one point, we were giving out $1.5 million a day. At one point, we were recognized by the U.S. Treasury as the #1 city in America. I think we finished in the top 3. We're still doing that. Consequently, when the governor lifted his eviction moratorium not too many months ago, everybody was surprised at the fact that there were so few evictions. So we had set that all up with mediation in anticipation of that, the transition. Well, I'm saying this on behalf of my team, but that was pretty special.
Yeah.
Okay. That was pretty special at a time when people really needed that kind of help. And nobody knew how to do it. But our guys figured it out. And they not only figured it out, they figured it out better than anybody else. And it meant so much to so many. And we continue to do those monies. We're getting ready now to spend the American Rescue Plan Act money, our first tranche of $193 million. We've had some discourse with, even though it's our legal position with the city council, I think we're getting that matter resolved. All the monies, we're aligned actually with a lot of what the council members want to do. We just want to be able to control the process, not have to make it too political. And on the heels of doing what we did with the rent and utility relief monies, we have a lot of confidence in how we want to distribute those monies, which will be a great resource and a great asset for Hawaii, so for Oahu especially. So I'm really proud of that stuff. As you can tell, I get a little emotional about it. because in the spirit of what we just said, to each other, it meant so much to so many. And we looked at the mapping software and we understood the distribution of where those monies were going. And they were island wide, especially heavy on the west side, not the North Shore, and to a lot of people who really needed that. We got it done.
When you're talking about you and your team, is there a philosophy that you shared with your team members going into being the mayor and running all the things in the city?
Yeah. Well, I think it started off with understanding what we were looking for versus who. What we did was unprecedented in that we set up a portal and we took applications for 10 days and we shut it off after 10 days. We're actually going to do it longer, but we had 547 applications, and some of these applications that were coming in were so incredible, we just shut it off. And then I had a transition of 6 people, which I was not a part of. But my managing director, Mike Formby, who I knew once I got elected, I asked him, I knew I wanted Mike to be the guy. And so they vetted the applications down. And then we set up a transition team of 18 people, 3 teams of 6. And what we tried to do for the 26 cabinet positions that we had. This is not counting my chief of staff or my communications director, or for that matter, the police chief, the fire chief, or the head of the water supply, who is currently Ernie Lau, who was that at the time. That we try to interview 6 people deep for every position, if we could get that. Not all positions we had 6 deep, but for many we did. And these 3 teams of people met on a Thursday, a Friday, and then the following week, it'd be a Friday, Saturday, then the following week, a Friday, from morning till night, and they interviewed. I didn't participate in the interviews, neither did Mike. We circulated, we watched people being interviewed, we knew who they selected. And then on that 4th day, the Saturday, we asked them, just like a draft, to rank them, give us the top 3 out of the 6. We looked at, all of them. We liked the first round picks in about a little bit more than 50% of the cases. From what we'd seen, it was some really close number 2s. It wasn't like we disliked anybody. It was like looking at that. And so I all offered jobs that weekend. They all accepted. Mike and I interviewed a number of the number 2s, some of whom we took because we thought it was better. And I'll going back to the what, because these are all people I didn't even know. But during the campaign, I said this on blind faith. I said, look, people would say to me, hey, what are you doing? You've never run anything like this before. And I kept saying repeatedly, yeah, I know, but I'm going to find the smartest thinkers and the smartest doers, and I think I can coach that. The unknown was, would they be there? Will the players show up? Because to me, I want to go back to my old coaching days. There's an old adage I learned from Larry Price, that physical superiority cancels out all theory. Okay, you need to have the players, man. Don't anybody kid you. You can draw up touchdowns all day long, or how are you going to stop it? It's what happens on the field of play, and that's the physical superiority. So I'll come back to that in a second. So make a long story short, we hired 22 out of the 26 positions. We kept 4. And then I did something different too, because I didn't owe anybody anything. In this job coming in, there was no political payback or whatever. And historically, what people did was a lot of the deputy positions were political favors or whatever, right? So what we didn't do, and this is really important, the number 1s got the job. In some cases, we hired number 2 over number 1 because we thought it was a better fit for us after looking at them. I told all the number 1s, you get to pick your deputy. I'm not going to pick it. You go find, because I'm not going to start out in that deficit model we were in, given the time, hoping that we met, so we didn't say, okay, you're number 1, you came in number 2, you're the deputy. We didn't do that. We said, the number 1, we said goodbye to all the ones that didn't get hired, told the number 1s, go find somebody you love. Okay?
So you're giving a bunch of your people choice.
And because I wanted, in the beginning, knowing what we had to overcome, right from the get-go, I wanted them to have that help, if you will, the sense that they were going in there as a team together. And that, I would tell you, they ended up producing 18 new deputies. Some we promoted from internally, some really exceptional people. But they brought in 18 people. And I would tell you, a lot of those people, if they had applied in the beginning, might have been the first round picks. That's how strong. I mean, that has a lot to do with the power of recruitment, because these people knew what they wanted. So I come back to the what. what we looked for, there were certain common denominators. It was less about any philosophy. It was what was it we were assembling. So we looked deeply at people who had proven track records of success and how they did that, and whether or not they could drive execution, what their communication skills were they the kind of people that had those intangibles that you look for in leaders, the kinds of people whom people would follow. Did they have that kind of command? Did they have the passion for the job? And probably more important than anything, as best we could determine, given what we're up against, would they hold up against adversity? I wasn't looking for anybody who was going to fade in the face of it getting tough. And so at that level of people we were seeing, that was discernible. You could see that. You could tell. You could feel it. It was palpable. That's why I was so encouraged. That's why I like to talk about them. I'm so proud of them. And so that's how we did it. So it wasn't so much some great message for me. The other thing is, did they understand teamwork? Did they understand the fact that part of the dysfunction of the city, it was notorious, was people operated in silos,
Mm-hmm.
And if we were going to go in under these extreme circumstances, we needed to have collaboration at the very least. And if we weren't going to have collaboration and trust amongst ourselves, we weren't going to have a team. And that's some of the things that you do know, from a lot of the experience I had. And that's something I thought I could bring to it, was setting the stage for that. Is that, we're going to function as a team. We're going to collaborate. And I wasn't going to put up with any divas. Okay. So that was it. And, we've had very few changes. We had to say goodbye to somebody. Actually, we said only goodbye to 2 people in our first year. And we just lost one who's going to move back to the mainland for family reasons. But other than that, this is a hell of a team, and they're doing a really good job for the city.
So when you look at your team and building partnership, I'm sorry, do you need water?
No, I'm good.
Go ahead.
I'm good. I was just looking to see where Ian was. He's
He
not
went to
there.
the bathroom.
Oh, okay.
Actually, we'll wait till he comes back out because he's get some water here.
Some water. How's this going? Okay.
You are a fantastic talker, conversationalist, storyteller.
Thank you.
100% awesome. You're making my job super easy. It's like,
Thank you.
So in building this team, and when you looked at everybody that you're bringing on, do you look at something along the lines of, are these individual candidates, applicants, whoever, do they have fear of failure? Do they have fear of success?
Mm-hmm.
And do those two things play in your mind when you're picking your team, or even throughout?
That's a great question. I think at the time we were looking at, because you have to kind of know somebody. And I would tell you that I've seen somebody recently who had a fear of failure, who's been in an interim position, that's withdrawn themselves as a candidate, and that kind of manifests itself. I think what we were looking for, as I said earlier, about not fading in the face of adversity, not so much the question you posed to me, but people who are somewhat fearless, who I felt intuitively they were to begin with, because you had people coming to us at a time of unprecedented fear and uncertainty, saying they wanted to step forward, even willing to take significant pay cuts to come and be part of this. Look, I'm not going to draw a parallel to Ukraine. That would be far too extreme, but we've seen that kind of national pride, if you will, in what's happened there. It's been amazing to watch. We had some of that here. We had people who said, this is my home. I love this place. I never thought this would happen, but it's happened. So what can I do about it? So we drew down on that, and you could see it, and it came up in the various conversations. So these weren't just job interviews. This is looking for people who could step up in leadership roles, who understood we had to deliver. It's more about that.
Would you say becoming mayor was one of the most pivotal parts of your life?
Yeah, at 73 years old.
Yeah.
Can you believe that? Yeah.
I can believe it, yeah.
Yeah. Well, this, first of all, I don't want to fail, okay? I'm driven to do well. And so it's challenging because, anytime you make a decision in this job, somebody's got something to say about it. Not everybody loves you for it, right? So there's that part of it. But it's also, I have loved this place. I've loved Hawaii. And Hawaii's loved me back all these years. in so many ways, and how my life has been. And my kids were born here. One of them's still here, but the other two come back every chance they get. Um, this is about giving back. I honestly, if we had this conversation 3 years ago, and I was down the street running Hawaii News Now, I tell you, I'm probably going to work a couple more years, maybe 75. Scott Humber used to joke about the fact I kept pushing back my retirement date, but I felt good, and I loved the team we had, and I loved the work we were doing, and it afforded me a really interesting entree to the community. And I was doing a lot of outreach stuff, and and just the dynamics of the team we'd put together, and the very nature of news business, or working with small businesses on the sales side, or for that matter, just the team we created on the roof at Hawaii News Now, and taking good care of that 150 people, if you will, and taking a lot of pride in recognizing that we were head and shoulders above the rest of the market, and we wanted to deliver on that because the product we were, quite honestly, being in broadcast is a kind of a quasi-government job. I had an FCC license, but as a general manager, I was held to a lot of rules, on what we could do, that I could have easily been fired for should we breached any of it. Not the least of which, and I think sometimes people forget this in this day and age, but when you're doing 50 plus hours of news a week, if we're doing any of it wrong, that's a lawsuit every minute of those 50 hours every week waiting to happen. So there was also that other challenge of good storytelling, by our team, especially once we chose to get involved in some of the in-depth investigative stuff as a public service, by getting it and doing it right. Those kinds of things would really hold your attention. So I think this job, as we said earlier, is a pivot, because it goes from that to having a real direct hand, as we said earlier, on making a difference in the quality of people's lives and in this environment that we all live and share together. It's a pivot, definitely. I would say this. I heard Nainoa Thompson say this. And so he said that his sense of kuleana kept evolving. I would say that's how I felt, is drawn to the challenge because of that. I didn't even know that would be within me, but I couldn't deny it at the time. And that was, again, pre-COVID. It was just like, I need to go try that. I'm going to do that. So, and I put it all on the line. I mean, I walked away from a job that was paying me very, very well, that I was comfortable in, again, pre-COVID, to then getting into something, walking away prematurely, if you will, to try doing something, because there was no guarantee you're going to get elected. And then when COVID hit, suddenly we learned about self-funding. You're writing the checks with no guarantee, because I didn't even want to ask my best friend for $5. I mean, everybody was like, what's going on here, And fortunately, after we won the primary, some money came in. And so got some good support and some of the unions, but we had to get to that point first. So, it was all of a sudden, before this privilege I have right now of being the mayor, it was suddenly we made a decision, and then we had to put everything on the line, that was that dynamic of not knowing we would win, or the financial risks that we were incurring, or the competitive nature of things being what they were. At one time, we had 15 people running for mayor, and some formidable people that had gotten into the race. I certainly have great respect for Colleen Hanabusa. Mufi was a savvy politician. I mean, he'd been around, and I mean, suddenly I'm running against some people that we used to cover and whatever, and they know their way around this arena. So I got into this, and we won, and we won big. And I really felt like that was the mandate, if to do a good job.
Throughout all of your successes, throughout your entire life, what, if anything, has consistently worked for you going forward to help you out?
That's a great question. I think it lies in authenticity. It lies in being consistent. I think I locked in my belief systems when I was young. Was mentored well, again, all through sports. I think I knew who I was, what I believed in. It didn't mean I didn't keep on learning. But, staying true to that. So, that understanding of self, having enough humility to recognize what you don't know, that I was trying to deceive myself, that kind of intellectual honesty. And then just a desire to succeed and to lead. I mean, I've always kind of was driven to the alpha position, I don't know, it's, and accept that responsibility. I think that was also part of it. I think people who knew me in broadcast, and they would tell you, and it was true even when I came back to Hawaii in 2002, taking on the 2 television stations at the same time. Everybody said you couldn't do that, and in a local market, 2 stations at once, it was really interesting. I'd go there and I'd stay. I was trying to figure out how to divide my time, and so I'd say, okay, I'll leave at 1 o'clock, and then you're leaving at 1 o'clock. Everybody goes, where are you going? I'm going to walk across the street, and you show up across the street, and they say, well, where have you been? It was like, now we're on for 3.5 years, but we turned those stations around, and we did some really good things. But it's been that understanding that when you're going to lead, especially in adverse situations where you're the guy to come in and be a turnaround, you have to be that, that consistent self, that authentic self, and trustworthy, and so it's been those kinds of principles. I take a lot of pride in that. It's not always easy, but I find that if I could be authentic and passionate about what I was doing and had some skills to offer, if I could collect other people around me, this goes back to team, who are authentic, passionate, had skills, and you bring it all together, some great things happen. And I think it's always understanding that, with humility, that, I never had to be. In fact, let me give you this insight for your listeners here. I feel like I've done a lot of talking here. I don't know if but one of the things that was a real carryover for me from coaching was that I was a pretty good player. I mean, I started the whole time, both at Springfield at college, where I graduated from, at the University of Hawaii for Coach Bryce, and pretty good player. But when I came back to coach here in Hawaii, not so much at Connecticut, I was coaching guys who were a lot better than I was, in my opinion. They were bigger, stronger, faster, could hit harder, could do different things, get to a drop zone, all that stuff. And I had to get comfortable in my own skin at an early age on how to coach guys who were just better than I was, and then that extended into recruiting guys who had the skill sets and whatever, and getting comfortable at that. When I got into television, initially when I was just a sales guy, it wasn't so much that, but once I got into management, I mean, you had to be fearless in who you're willing to surround yourself with. If you want to create a great team, you had to recognize you didn't have to be the smartest guy, and be comfortable in your own skin knowing that, but how to work with people like that. That was a real good carryover. And then through the years, that has proven to be the case. And any success I've ever had, it's been the quality of the organizations, the men and women we've put together. And I would tell you that part of the success within that, I used to talk about, I always managed 3 kinds of capital. First was the money, but I always treated the money as a byproduct of the organization. So that really stemmed from what was the quality of your human capital, the men and women you were able to attract. But the real difference in making it work was how do you deal with the primary derivative of your human capital, which is its intellectual capital. And how do you work with people and their minds and their ideas? And what are you willing to embrace? And do you create a culture that says, for want of a better way to say it, best idea wins? Okay. So, and being open to that and driving change. So I think that that part of growth and learning and understanding that if you're going to lead, and I'm feeling it right now, I'm feeling it more so now because, like I said earlier, I got so many smart people that really know so much, that you've got to be able to do that. And that's just, and that starts with probably not putting yourself first and realizing, realizing that, what you have the privilege of working with.
Right. So there's these 2 questions that I'd like to ask my guests.
Go ahead.
Kind of taper off and to close out here. Do you have a quote that you like to live by? Or just a favorite
I have
quote?
A favorite quote. I tell you, years ago, I was reading an excerpt on servant leadership. And there was a paragraph, actually. I should memorize this paragraph, but I'm going to tell you a line from this paragraph. And it seems more apt today than the 30 years ago when I first read it. But it was an excerpt from a play written by George Bernard Shaw, the great Irish playwright. And the play was written in 1903, and the name of the play was called Man and Superman. And in it, he talks about serving the community. He says, because the harder I work, the more I live, the more I love. And then he simply says, because I want to be used up when I die. And when I first read that, and I was a lot further from the finish line than I probably am today, I thought, that's the way to do it. That's the way to do it. Just so it's not like it's an adage that everybody says, like a favorite old saying. It's just how somebody put words together that really at the time resonated with me and sort of in some ways became my own little North Star, is to go for it and give it. I said earlier tonight in this conversation, I said about, what you give, you keep, and what you save, you lose. It's sort of like that. It's just going all out. So that has been, I think, my approach in life, one. And then the other, if I can deduce this.
Of course.
Okay. Years ago, I was watching a training film by Northwestern Mutual that was done in their headquarters at the university, and it was the University of Minnesota, and this guy named Lou Holtz was the head coach before he ever went to Notre Dame. And so they zero in on Lou Holtz, and there he is. He's a diminutive guy, and of course, even in those days, all these Big Ten football players are all like bigger than most people. And they're standing there in the locker room. Some are sitting on a bench, some are kneeling down, and they're looking adoringly at Holtz. And he's espousing to them his belief system and what they can expect from him as the head coach. And this is what this tape is all about. And then they get around to talking about, I don't want whiners. I don't want you going around telling people about your problems. If you have problems, you come to me. And then he very simply said, and I never forgot this line. In fact, years later when I met him, I asked him about this. He said, because I'll tell you why. If you go around telling people about your problems, it makes you feel good. You think they care? He said 90% of the people you tell your problems to, they don't care. He said, and the other 10%, they're glad you got them. So the point to that, okay, the point to that little level of cynicism is know who's in the inner core. Who are the people that the day you die are really going to be impacted by that, who really care, whose lives, and take care of that. Take care of those people in that inner circle. And I've held to that belief.
Just fantastic quotes. The first one is something that I strive to live by also, like just work, have fun, share with family. Don't waste too much time on this planet because it's limited.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of my time here, I want it to be as valuable and productive as possible for all those that I'm leaving behind. So love that quote. Final question. Is there a historical figure that you like to study about or that you would like to have a conversation with?
Wow, that's a great question. I've often wondered about that. I mean, I haven't had the time to read enough, in the excerpts, if you will, of whether autobiographies or I just haven't. There are a lot of famous figures, and I've had the privilege in my lifetime sometimes of being around some really, really good people, famous people, not to confuse celebrity, but people who've earned it. I'll say this. I'll just give you another lesson that I learned, rather than a person.
Okay.
I learned this. I was in a hotel room. This is a number of years ago. In fact, it was in Seattle. It was the Warwick Hotel, and I was getting dressed. I still remember this very setting. And on television was the Barbara Walters special. It was coming on, the great Barbara Walters. And it was her 25th anniversary special. And every year for 25 years for ABC, she interviewed 4 people in every show, the same formula, but they were the 4 people at that time that they could determine were the most interesting, popular, successful people on the planet, whether they came from politics, royalty, sports, business, political, whatever, okay? And so In the 25th show, the person who's interviewing, which I don't remember who it is, says to Barbara Walters, so over the course of the last 25 years, you've interviewed 100 of the world's most famous people, irrespective of what their discipline was. Was there a common denominator? To which she said, yes, there was. She said 201, every one of them, took their work very seriously. But 201, every one of them, did not take themselves very seriously. They had that special brand of humility, and they understood who they were, but they also understood their responsibility. And I would tell you, that said a lot to me. A lot. And it's made a difference. I never thought I would learn it from Barbara Walters, but that was it, because she had that benefit. She had that perspective. She got to talk to these people.
It's almost like the ingredients for leadership.
Yeah. Well, don't underestimate humility. I think some people don't realize that. You've got to keep your feet on the ground. If you attain success, too many people buy into their own. There's an old saying that before the gods destroy a man, they first make him vain. And I've seen that vanity destroy people many times. It's true. It's from the Greeks. It's an old saying that's been a bit of a moral compass for me.
Mr. Mayor, it has been such an honor and a pleasure having you on and getting your feedback and just a depth of knowledge from you. You need to come on more shows, all kinds of shows, because I feel like you have so much knowledge, experience, memories, so much to share.
Thank you.
And I'm glad that I could get like 1 hour of your time to put that out there.
I've enjoyed doing this, and I hope I haven't bored your listeners. And this is this. I just tell everybody, let's just go and enjoy life and make things better. Okay.
Enjoy life, make things better. Y'all heard it. All right. Thank you again so much. And as always, everybody, stay happy, Hawaii.